rangatira e, mihi mai ki rungara. I te hara ko o te kaupapa e, he taonga nei tatou katoa. Me ngā tēnei hei tū hono hono e, he tikanga paina te aroha e au e. Ka paua te manawa, whitirere tonu ake nā te rangi mari e. Nā te rangi mari e. Rā rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I wanted to share that with you because that brings Tuini Ngāwai into the room, from my tipuna to your tipuna. An example of innovation as we understand it, as she sang her whai kōrero. And I wanted to bring that as an example also of innovation, of thinking on your feet, and of rangatiratanga. He uri tēnei o Ngāti Porou rākai pāka, me Ngāti Kahununu. I bring my mountains to yours, I bring my rivers to yours, I bring my people to join with you as we have done in our tribal pasts. I wanted to talk to you today about a piece of work, 2 years of our lives. Copies are in the kete that you've been given. It's a piece of work from the Families Commission Māori research team that's on Māori success. We need to talk about it more, we need to celebrate it more, and we need to make it our business to be finding it and studying it. Because it is everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere, and it is being kept under the radar. So this is about flinging back the sheets, bringing it out, and allowing us to celebrate the things that we do connected to our past right now that give us a 1,000-year future. The cover is a particularly important one for me because that's Hekurangi, and wherever we go we take our mountains because they are our way of standing in our own space, in our own groundedness, and knowing which part of the world we come from and how we look at it. Our research, whānau yesterday, today, tomorrow, in terms of its approach, takes what we call an inside-out approach. What do we mean by that? We mean that the whole research starts inside our own culture, our own worldview, and looks out at the world from that space. So much other research on Māori, about Māori, is done from the outside, looking in, by non-Māori, by strangers to us, strangers to our world, who look in at us, who gaze in at us, and who make judgments about what they see. So this is not that kind of research. Inside out, Māori worldview, it's about the Māori Renaissance. We take that from 1975 to the present, relatively short historical period, and it is narratives of whānau success. What do we mean by that? It's the real stories of real people. You'll know some of these people. So the young woman on the cover, Hunure Wapotu, was on Native Affairs last night on the real debate at Te Papa. She's the poster girl for our research, and we'll tell you why in a little moment, but she's also the youngest member of the Constitutional Review Party that the government has put together recently to consider some of our pathways to the future in constitutional terms. A little bit about the operating of the Families Commission. You've heard some of this morning. 2 key things from the legislation that are critical to the Māori staff. Section 11. The Act requires us to have regard for the needs, the values and the beliefs of Māori as tangata whenua. That's really important for us in terms of framing our work. We are also required to look at factors that enhance resilience and strength. So the whole strength-based approach for us again is another really important part because that plays into what it is that we do well, what it is that we do right, and our stories are about how different people have done that. So in terms of the needs, values and beliefs of Māori, we take that to mean the Māori worldview, And I know half of the people in the room will be saying, excuse me, the iwi worldview? Yep, absolutely. What we're calling the Māori cultural infrastructure, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too, and Māori cultural knowledge, method and practice. So what you see here is the hongi at a marae, and you understand the cultural practice of greeting that hongi is about. You will know the belief system that hongi comes from, and you will also know that there's all sorts of different practices about hongi. People hongi in different ways. And if you're unlucky, they don't hongi you at all. They just grab a big kiss and move on to the next important person who they want to hongi. But traditionally, hongi was the way we all greeted to share that breath. And in the sharing of the breath, the coming together of our purpose and of our intention. One of these maraes, this is the marae Te Maungarongo at Ohope, which is the marae built by Te Aka Puaho, the Presbyterian Māori Synod within the Presbyterian Māori Church. So our understanding of resiliency and strength then is how we bring all of that knowledge together. How do we bring our knowledge, our practice and our different ways of doing things together for the benefit of our families? I'm going to quickly go through what's in the report because I'd like to spend the greater part of this presentation on the conclusions and the implications of the conclusions that we came to. So what is in the report? Well, firstly, we've got a fabulous demographic and statistical chapter, which I absolutely love because it's written by two Māori statisticians. One of them, Whetu Wereta, is one of the most significant Māori statisticians in this country, just recently retired from managing the Māori unit in Stats New Zealand. Wife of Tūmanako, who some of you may have worked with through the Tuarapoki Trust. And the approach that she and Lisa Davies, another young Māori statistician and demographer, took was to write a chapter that they had always wanted to write but weren't able to in terms of the prevailing thinking about demography and statistics necessarily. So it's a chapter that two Māori statisticians and demographers have written from a kaupapa Māori point of view. They have new information in here, they have new insights and interpretations that are very, very interesting to read. And I would encourage you, particularly to this chapter. As you're aware, we didn't have a census last year because of the earthquakes in Christchurch. And so this chapter here is another source that people can go to for some of the current thinking, particularly the Māori thinking in this area. We have a whole chapter on different ways to explore whānau, because people often say to us, well, you know, whānau's family, isn't it? You know, any real difference between the two? We think there are critical differences, and we think that in the lack of understanding about those differences features some of the real difficulties that agencies, such as WINS, for example, have when they are working with Māori. So we have a section where we talk about the worldview, we talk about our knowledge codes, we talk about that wonderful cultural institution that is the heart of our economic, social and cultural well-being, and that is our marae. And we talk about Māori development in the machinery of government. Very interesting things happening at the moment to the machinery of government space. Whānau order, totally rewiring it. The Y262 claim, again, a rewiring and a rethinking in terms of how notions of Māori, relationships with knowledge are integrated into what government departments do. So it's a very exciting time at the moment to be involved in this kind of work. The difficulty, of course, is that machinery of government is so convoluted and so big that if you take the wrong nut off at the wrong time, you might end up with something falling on your feet that you hadn't anticipated. And the vision here, the image here of different explorations of whānau, that's my daughter. And we needed some promotional work done for Awanuiarangi and some of the course brochures we were developing in courses for government. So she got chucked on the front of them and given very serious messages that if there hadn't been a Māori Prime Minister yet, well, you know, maybe that's something she could aspire to. Because we're not subtle, are we? As a people, we're not subtle with our career counselling and the things we say and do with our own children. We've taken quite a bit of time in the report to chart out how we did what we did, how we thought about the approaches we took. because there are some really important ways to do research that this report is a testimony of. Firstly, that it is kaupapa Māori research, and that's important to us. You'll be aware that the whānau order program is not being undertaken in its evaluation and review using kaupapa Māori research. The methodology there is action research. It's quite a different methodology, and we are putting a stake in the ground and saying, in the last 20 to 30 years, Māori people, Māori scholars like our fabulous Manuka Henare, Ranganui Walker, Linda and Graham Smith have carved out a very unique space in the research community called kaupapa Māori research, and we have wanted to champion that in this report. So that means that our knowledge, our ways of doing things, and who we are is the centre, not on the outside or the periphery or an afterthought. It is the centre. It is the place where we start, and it is the place that frames everything that we do. It's also called inside-out research, and that literally means standing on the inside of our world and looking out instead of the other way around. It's called, in some other parts of the research community, endogenous development. And all we're doing in bringing this body of work together in this report is helping our people to see that what we're on about is robust and has incredible support in the wider research community. And I can hear Dame Eritana saying, as I say that, as if we needed it, as if we needed validation from anybody else, and that is right. But for some of the young people coming through, they do want to know, how can we make the case from both sides of the treaty? And so that's what this chapter does. It is, as Wali Penotito talked about in the Royal Commission on Social Policy in 1988, by Māori for Māori about places, and in Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, of course, in places also in the reo. It's in a new TPK report called Māori Developed, Designed and Delivered, and the narrative accounts aspect is about actually taking the voices of the people we worked with and using those as the data. What they said, what they've done, what they believe, who they are, is good enough for this research. And it's very much success in Māori terms. One of the fabulous, absolutely fabulous chapters of the report, and it has led to a second publication, is interviews with leading Māori women who've worked in whānau development, which Colleen Tuuta did for us. Rose Pere, Eritana Tawhiwhirangi, Are Tukopu, Neida Glavich, Paparangi Reid, Moi Milne, Mariana Pittman, your very own Ngaropi Cameron, Barbara Green, Kyla Russell. Women who throughout the country have been involved in whānau development for at least 30 years. We also interviewed the late Dame Katarina Mataira just before she passed, but in the publication on Māori women, it was just too soon for the whānau, and they have retained that script for their whānau archives and may do some work with it in the future. As Colleen spoke to these fabulous women about what they've done, what they've seen, how they do what they do, why they do what they do, 6 key themes came clearly through. 1, the role of wairuatanga in their everyday lives, in their belief system and in how they conduct themselves. 2, whakapapa, which they described as the golden thread. 3, a whole section around Māori women. So, for all of us who are charting our way in a modern world and wanting to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, these women have wonderful kōrero that we can all learn from. They also, as one of their major themes, and I think this is an absolute testimony of whānau as a model and as a model of success, talked about our men, every single one of them. Our fathers, our brothers, our sons, our uncles, our nephews, the men in our family. And I am so honoured that a group of these leading women have made our men such a special part of their work and of their thinking. I'm sure that if we interviewed 12 of the leading Māori men in New Zealand, they would do exactly the same about Māori women. They would, wouldn't they? They all would. Thank you. Kia ora. Key theme whanaungatanga. Who we are is who we're descended from, who we're connected to. So yes, many of the photos in this presentation are my children or my mother or my son or my aunts, because that's just the way it goes. And when you get a chance to do the presentation, you can put your whānau in too. And critically, mana motuhake, that we need no one's permission to chart our course to the future. We ask no one for permission when we are really in that rangatira space. When I wanted to name my daughter Horiana after my grandmother, after her great-grandmother, a woman who wouldn't let any of her children be named Horiana or her grandchildren, because when she was born, Hori was what her name became. Stinky, Smelly were her nicknames. No one was to take that name. And we went to her, my sister had to ask, and persuaded her that a new time was coming when Horiana would be a beautiful name again. And she reluctantly agreed. And that young woman who you just saw outside Parliament carries that name with all of the intent that we took to the old lady with. Those are acts of rangatiratanga. Those are ways in which, in the next generation and the generation after, we carry the memory of our tipuna on personally, in our own whānau and through our own actions. Henerewa Pautu, again, one of the chapters we looked at was undertaken by Huhana Rocks, formerly CEO of Te Tautawhiri o Te Reo Māori and now CEO of a hauora at home in Tolaga Bay. She looked at the idea of whānau as the custodians of culture on the grounds that the state and the machinery of state has actually not been the place where our knowledge has been retained. So she drilled down into a group of whānau, the Winitana whānau, and interviewed them about their whānau journey in the reclamation and retention of Te Reo Māori and what they describe as the birth now of a hapu. And it's a beautiful story. Chris has recently released a book on some of his thinking and their work, but at the time that they allowed Huhana to interview them, it was the first time they were telling publicly their whānau story. Fabulous story of taking the power back to reclaim te reo, mātauranga and the knowledge that goes with it, independent of what the state's intention or policy was. So although I would be one of the first to argue that we need to be very clear about the structural dimensions of the work that we do, what is the role of policy, what has been the role of the state, our most powerful space is the space we don't ask permission to exercise. This is a chapter that was a lovely one for us to be written by Sandra Portaka and Vivis McCawson. It's on an iwi outside of Te Puke, who has had most of their natural and economic resources taken from them. When they do the presentation on their own iwi and their own strategic planning, they put up about 11 slides of their maunga, their awa, their moana, the whenua, all the different wāhi tapu, and then they say that's what we lost. And they show one photo of one wharenui with 86 people in the front at a Christmas party, and they say that's what we've got left. And that's what we're working with, and that's what we're building our future with. And it's a very important iwi statement about planning for the future, because we do hear more about the large iwi, the Ngaitahu settlement, the Tainui development, the Ngāti Porou recent settlement, but the stories of other iwi, in some numerical sense, is smaller, but in an iwi narrative sense, equally as powerful as those larger, in numerical terms, iwi, is a lovely story. One of the critical things their young people wanted to start with was reclaiming the gardens, reclaiming the knowledge of growing the kai that used to be one of their taonga. So wherever the journey starts in terms of reclaiming that future, this is an example of showing that without necessarily the greatest resource base that an iwi has a right to have, the future can still be a strong one. We had a chapter done looking at the role of Te Reo Māori me ona tikanga in economic transformation. One of the critical messages as we come to our conclusions of the Māori Renaissance has yes been about its cultural revitalisation, but more importantly, it's been about the economic transformation and growth. And in this chapter, Dave Bassett, whose children are Māori and who's married to one of Katerina Mataira's daughters, did a case study of Boy, the film, Kia Kaha, the clothing business, Kai Taia Whaia, a chili sauce, and Ruakuri, the caves outside of, they're close by Waitomo, but they're not the Waitomo caves. Fabulous stories about global businesses with major economic growth linked clearly to Te Reo Māori, Mātauranga Māori and our culture. What I love about the story about the caves is that the government tried to take those caves back under an act that related to their ability to claim anything that makes money in simple terms. And the people who owned the land went through as much detailed legal argument as they could find to fight the government. And they found, still on the statute books in New Zealand, an act that goes back to something like 1325, and it says that a man, sorry girls, but it does say this, a man owns his land to the centre of the earth. To the centre of the earth. And so no matter how far down the caves were, they still owned them. And they went to court, it all went through legal proceedings, and that piece of legislation, which the whānau themselves had found still on the books, enabled them to keep the Crown at bay, and they have subsequently entered into a partnership with DOC and the Crown to develop an opportunity. But that one, you know, sometimes we say our legislation is old and archaic and it's not from our worldview and it doesn't suit us. That one really did. They owned it to the centre of the earth, then the caves are still ours, and just fabulous story. So the key messages from that, and yes, this is Tāne Nui Arangi Marae in Nuhaka, that's one of our whānau marae. The messages of the Renaissance, number one, are economic as much as they are cultural, and we have waited for so long for the economists to come on board. The messages are about leadership that for us is local and ours. Local and ours. Every single one of us has leaders in our whānau, in our hapu, in our iwi, and stories of leadership that have been our inspiration and our bridge to being able to create new futures. Where I come from in Nuhaka, tiny little place, you may have blinked as you drive through it. There is a fabulous story there of resistance. We had a particular pa that was so high up that we were able to retreat there and not be defeated by a particular raiding group. I think they may have come from somewhere around you, Manuka. And one of the practices in that pa was to mix the kai with clay if the siege got too long. And in the end, this raiding party left gifting a name to that area from North Auckland as a tribute to not being able to take us in that particular altercation. So Momo Kai, Kaiuku, and all the connotations and the stories around Nuhaka, oh, you better believe our people from that tiny little community know about scarcity, know about resistance, know about resilience, and that's our little story. But the point about our knowledge base is the stories are built from the bottom up. Every marae, every community, every rohe has their own stories and their own leadership. Manuka gave you an overview of the Māori economic stats that were recently produced by Burl. One of the critical things in that for me was that the total is $36.9 billion, yes, in the Māori economy. Look at that second category there. $20.8 billion from Māori employers. So the discourse that kicks around Wellington, that Māori wealth has come from the Crown and it's really just a feature of the treaty settlement process, not so. Yes, 10 billion is linked into that settlement process, but 20 billion is not. And 5.4 billion comes from the Māori self-employed. So one of the things my mother used to teach me was we need to do our own homework, because people who are telling us things have their own point of view and their own agenda when they do tell us them. We need to be clear we are doing our own homework for ourselves and planning our own futures. You know about Māori leadership. You know about local leadership. You know who you will follow and why. The challenge for New Zealand is not that we don't have enough Māori leadership. It actually might be we have too much. We've been called outliers. We've been identified as outliers on the international stage. And outliers as a term comes from a book written by Malcolm Gladwell, an international bestseller. And what it talks about is if you have patterns in statistics and there are outlying little clusters that don't follow the trend, the really interesting research is what's happening in that little outlier. And we are considered outliers in the international Indigenous community. Our experience of colonisation is unique in many respects to this country. What's that about? We are also entrepreneurs, and Manuka has talked about some of that historical context of entrepreneurship. 2004 and 2006, major international studies called the Global Entrepreneurial Monitoring Reports found Māori to be the third most entrepreneurial people in the world. Do you hear that in the news? Do you see that on TV1 News? How does that fit in with our usual scenarios of mad, sad and bad Maoris? That's a whole different view. And in whose interests is that view being kept under the horizon? We need to be celebrating this stuff. This is what I want my kids and my whānau to know about. So this couple here won the Ahuwhenua Farming Award a couple of years ago. Fabulous young couple. He left school at the age of 16, so it's a story both of their current situation as entrepreneurs, how they got there, and also the industry they came from. So this is a farming story, this is a dairy farming story. And as a young couple, he left school at age 16, went into a number of short-term summer employment jobs, got into dairy farming, and found an industry in which he was scaffolded to success. Very clear business training, very clear business models as they tell the stories themselves. And a critical part of the application they made for this award was that they use whānau as the business model for their success. Current wealth estimated at 35 million. I don't know about you, but I think I could learn a few things from them. And actually, I went on a company, New Zealand Institute of Directors company director course, and he was on it. And there was a whole group from Fonterra in that course. And this is another example of whānau. There were only 2 Maoris in the course, me and him. Whole group of Fonterra men on the course. And we were going into a case study on board dynamics. And of course you pick all the roles and you have to do a kind of a play scenario. The night before at the dinner, he just walked past me and said, "Don't allow yourself to be nominated as the chairperson tomorrow." And I thought, oh yeah. You know, there weren't a lot of women in the room, and I was thinking, yeah, I could be a chairperson. But there was just something in his voice. So I said, okay, I got you. Came in the next day, we'd like to nominate Kathie Irwin as the chair. Sorry, I have another role I have in mind. And a poor academic from Waikato who was so wonderful and positive, a young man, volunteered to be the chair. And I just covered my eyes. They took him apart. As the scenario went on, they just took him apart. But the thing they did at the end, which I found interesting, and I'm not sure that they would have done this for me, is they put him together again before he had to go to the public room and report. That's a very Māori thing to do, I'd suggest to you. Didn't know me from a bar of soap, but he wasn't going to have me ridiculed in that forum, and I really thank him for that. Now, this is a lovely one too. We hear a lot about our kids who are not doing well at school. What we don't hear about is that Māori in the Indigenous communities of the world are amongst the most successful PhD graduates. At the moment, there are 350 Māori enrolled in PhDs just this year. Our PhD graduations are growing through the roof. They're absolutely growing through the roof. And so, at the very least, we should be honest about the full scan. Yes, some of our people here, particularly our young people, still have areas that they need help with, but at this end, leading the way, really leading the way internationally. And Alvin Toffler, who wrote in 1990, a famous futurist, wrote a book called Knowledge and Violence at the Edge of the 21st Century. Talks about a change in the labour market from what used to be described as the proletariat, the people whose physical muscle power earned them a wage, to what he now calls the cognitariat, the high-paying jobs of the future being those who are able to tap this muscle here. And that's where our people are headed, with those PhDs, into those places at the top of the labour market, creating whole new opportunities for us. And the important thing for us is the opportunities that they are creating are Māori opportunities. That's the change. That's what the Renaissance has given us. This is not just Māori doing well in mainstream models. This is Māori changing the game, changing the paradigm, thinking outside the box. Our people think so far outside the box they're not even in the box or anywhere near it. And we need to acknowledge that. The major changes in education have come through the kohanga, kura, wharekura, wānanga stream, and that is an international success story. So we talked, and I'll conclude now with the Māori cultural infrastructure, the last key message, because when you talk about infrastructure, and particularly at the moment, people usually think roading, power, phones, telecommunications. Well, actually, from the definition of infrastructure, the underlying foundation or basic framework as a part of a system or organisation, we can understand and start to describe our own cultural infrastructure. Because the success that we've had in becoming outliers and world leaders is not a fluke. There is a very clear system underpinning it all. This is some of Charles Royal's work around our own worldview and the relationship of kaupapa and tikanga in it. We are living and practising those things. That's me and my 2 children in Hicks Bay, and we caught all those fish. I'm sure the methods were very traditional, but if they weren't, the fish certainly were. So in that infrastructure are, number one, our people. We never gave up on ourselves. What's that about? In the face of such colonisation and oppression, we never gave up on ourselves. We carried those names on. There are people in this room who will be named after things your people want to remember. In our family, we name after the people whose trays we want to remember. We never gave up on ourselves. Number 2, we never gave up on our worldview. So when the Crown made, through the Tohunga Suppression Act, our mātauranga illegal, we went underground. But we never gave up on our own mātauranga. Our 1,300 marae throughout the country, yes, 1,300, are an actual infrastructure that we can and do practice our own worldview through. We don't need anybody else's club rooms, community centre, or church if we want to have our own cultural celebrations. We have a place we can go to. Our whānau hapu iwi social structure, you all know about. It is a particular social structure that is group focused. The environment is not external to us. We are of Papatūānuku. We are born into Papatūānuku through our own creation story. And lastly, and it's lovely to have Kore Mako here, the broadcasting and IT is the whole new way that we are able to link together. My sister's in London. If she doesn't hear from me by 8 o'clock at night, she wants to know what's happening through Facebook. She wanted to get Skype, and I said, no, because we're too connected sometimes. And all I could think of with Skype, we'd never be off the phone. Those things are about the knowledge economy in society. No culture has a mandate on genius. The next great idea could come from any culture, and that includes Māori. Māori cultural knowledge offers New Zealand an authentic point of difference, and the pathways to the future are about being able to celebrate the historical edge the treaty gives us, a legislative mandate, a nation-building responsibility, and real cultural authenticity. We do things our way because we have a right to and because they work. The braided river approach that we use in our research is about bringing Māori ways of doing research into everything we do. This is my daughter. Her name is Horiana. When she went to varsity, I thought she was going to do singing because she studied singing all the way through secondary school. She became a lawyer, and she came home and she said, Mum, as soon as I graduate, I'm going to work for the iwi. And I thought, oh God, no! Go and work for Bill Gates for 20 years first, because we're pretty tough on our own. Well, actually, she went to Russell McVeigh. 2 years later, she was approached by Kahui Legal. She now has Martina Kumahawika, a Ngāti Porou lawyer, as a senior partner. On the other side, she's got Damien Stone from Ngāti Kahungunu. And on the third side, she's got Jamie Ferguson, which is her Pākehā whakapapa. That's us at the signing of the Ngāti Porou Settlement Bill. $100 million moved hands, not without some issues, but we were there as signatories as a testimony to our future generations that we will be part of creating our own futures. Kia ora koutou.